Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of our new webinar series. This fall, we plan to take you on a Global Fintech Ecosystem Tour, and today is our first stop, Iceland. My name is Mary Alcantara. I'll be the host for this session, and on behalf of the Hungarian Fintech Association, I'd like to welcome you all and hope that you enjoy the discussion. Before we get started, I'm going to pass the word to Zoltán Ács, our president, and he's going to say a few words of introduction and welcome. So Zoli, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi all. I would like to welcome you all here in the very first Global Fintech Ecosystem Tour episode. It's going to be a webinar because one of our main goals is to educate the ecosystem, the members of the ecosystem, and of course the potential customers and clients about fintech companies and fintech solutions. And this is about getting some knowledge about how others do organizing the ecosystem, a successful ecosystem. So in this series, in the future, we have a guest, for example, from Romania, from the Philippines, from the United States, from Romania, from the neighboring countries, of course. But the very first guest is from Iceland, Gunnlaugur Jonsson. I hope my pronunciation was not so bad. So not to keep you waiting any longer, Mary, the floor is yours, and enjoy this meeting, enjoy this webinar, and let's kick it off. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Zoli. So I'll be moderating today's session. It's going to be about 1 hour altogether. I have some questions prepared for the first 45 minutes, and then I will open it up to the audience. So as you're listening, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A or the chat function in Zoom, and we'll be sure to get to them later on. So I am pleased to introduce our guest for today, Gunnlaugur Jonsson. He is the CEO of the Reykjavik Fintech Cluster. Gunnlaugur founded the Fintech Cluster in 2018 and has grown it to over 100 members, ranging from banks and universities to the earliest of startups. They organize events, establish international relations, started an innovation center, mentor and connect people. Gunnlaugur is also one of the founders of Speakness, a discussion platform for media. So welcome, Gunnlaugur. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Mary.
So we are excited to get to know you a little bit and the Icelandic fintech ecosystem. It sounds like our organizations have quite a few synergies. I think we're trying to do similar things. So we're excited to hear your perspective and kind of how we can learn from what's working in Iceland and how we can compare and collaborate in the future. So why don't we get started with just kind of a high-level overview of the Icelandic fintech ecosystem? When did fintech really start to take off in Iceland?
Well, it has sort of been developing over decades, of course. It's a slow evolution. And we had instantaneous payments, that is real-time payments, many decades ago, probably before any other country. And the reason for that is perhaps the smallness of the country, while we had our independent currency, and it was quite easy, therefore, to connect everything. So that's been building over time, and it's been taking different forms over time. And of course, then some of the viewers may know that the entire Icelandic banking system collapsed in 2008. All of the banks collapsed, and it was really a calamity for the economy. And but out of that, for example, came some fintech startups that have since developed, and they've just been coming in since then. More and more of them have been founded. There was increased energy in the sector 5 years ago when we started the Reykjavik Fintech Cluster. And so we could sort of say, of course, this wave had started before that, but it was enhanced at that time.
And you said you have about 100 members so far in the cluster.
Yes.
Is that a mix? Is it majority startups, or what's the kind of the distribution of the members?
I would say a majority fintech companies, not all of them startups, but tens or dozens of startups.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And
yeah.
And who would you say is driving the ecosystem? Is it the fintech, the startups and the fintech companies, or is it more coming from the banking side in the wake of the crisis and kind of, trying to recover, but also come out with some new innovations?
Now, there are people that have been related to banks that have started startups, but I would say that the main initiative has come from the startups themselves, because banks are often slow to adopt these solutions. You really have to, banks are banks, of course, and you sort of have to approach them very early and have many meetings with them to have them adopt any of your solutions. So yeah, the initiative is from the grassroots, so to speak.
And what are some of the notable fintech companies in Iceland that are driving this, and who's doing the cool stuff? Who should we look out for?
I'd like to mention a few. One is Lucinity. It was started on one desk in the fintech cluster on the first day of operation. It was we had two IKEA desks there side by side, me, the founder of the cluster, and he, the founder of this first company to be founded in the cluster 5 years ago almost. And so that has really grown. It's a company that we introduced to its first customer and to its first investor. And then they started onboarding more customers, being banks. So what they're doing is they use artificial intelligence to work against money laundering. And so they have this system which makes it very easy, because all banks have to go through transactions, monitor transactions, and decide what's potentially money laundering. And so that everything is filtered, and then they filter it again, and then some things go to the police that are suspect. And so they use artificial intelligence for that, and a very ingenious way of using all the data so that it happens very efficiently and in the bank. And they have since gotten larger customers, such as Goldman Sachs, a very notable bank in the world, and others. So they're really growing now, and they have something like 50, 60 employees, and went through a Series B round recently, and are really moving up.
And they started right next to you at the beginning of the cluster. Wow, that's an incredible story. 5 years ago.
They outgrew us very fast and had to move out. Yeah. And then there's one company I'd like to mention is Monerium. What they're doing is they're putting the euro on the blockchains. So it's sort of like stable coins, which people know from the blockchain business. And but it's based on the European regulation on e-money. So they have a license to issue e-money. So they're doing this in a regulated manner, in a much more solid manner than others have done. And also it's euros on blockchain. Stable coins have usually been in the dollar. So they keep every euro for you in safe storage, but you have a digital copy of that euro then, and you can transact with it. You can create smart contracts, etc. It's programmable money essentially, like Bitcoin, but it's not Bitcoin. It's fiat currency. It's the euro, and they're really starting to grow now with different solutions. Different platforms are starting to adopt their euros and use their euros. One more interesting company is Pay Analytics. Pay Analytics is a company that analyzes the salaries of a company and helps equalize the gender wage gap. So they figure out what are the criteria that comprise the wage of a person, and for example, education, different kinds of abilities, etc. And they create a model where you can actually compare what part of the difference in salaries is due to gender. They usually find that it's at least a few percentage points. In Iceland, it's rather low. In other countries, it's higher. And then they help companies create strategies to equalize that, usually by raising the salaries of women, and then keep that wage gap closed. Because what happens over time, if you don't keep it closed, it opens up again. And they had seen that during efforts to close the wage gap before. And that's a company that's really growing fast. It has a hockey stick growth. And they have large international customers, such as the German insurance giant Allianz and others. And they're on all continents and in 40 or 50 countries. So
wow.
that was founded only a few years ago as well. So that's a big success story.
Yeah, I'm not surprised it's coming out of a country like Iceland, but very much needed. Do you happen to know how they're monetizing? What's the business model there?
Yes, it's just well, I don't know exactly, but they just have these subscriptions based on the number of employees for the companies. So if you have 120,000 employees, of course you pay more than someone that has 1,000 employees, but per employee it's probably lower. So yeah, that's essentially the model. But yeah,
and that's great that companies are willing to invest into understanding these factors and really trying to create an end to the gender wage gap. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, great companies for us to keep an eye out. So
only 3 examples, but there are more, but we can't go through all of them.
Are these all members of your cluster?
Yes.
By the way,
these are all companies that we've been supporting and helping, and we have been thanked for part of their success. So
great, very cool. And then in terms of kind of the ecosystem or the landscape in general, you mentioned instant payment coming online quite early in Iceland, and that being kind of a defining feature. Are there any other fintech innovations, anything else about the ecosystem that particularly relevant or would be useful for us to be aware of?
These are sort of the examples I would have liked to mention, but I can add one or two. So there's one company called Igloo, which is a platform for rent. And on that platform, you can buy an insurance for the rent payments, so that people that are paying rent, they don't have to put up a few months of collateral for the rent. They just pay a premium for that insurance. And everybody has a reputation on the platform. Are you a good payer? Are you a good tenant? Etc. And they've sort of won the market in Iceland, and then they're moving to other countries now. And that's one example of a company that, if there's someone in Hungary that would like to collaborate with them, they could be contacted. Another interesting company that could be contacted with a solution is Yay. It's YAY. There's Yay, like celebration. And what they have is a gift card platform. So you can buy gift cards for many different stores, but they have a fun way of delivering that gift card. So I used that once for a wedding. Instead of bringing a present, I sent that gift card with a video greeting, and it sort of became even more personal than having one more of those packages at the wedding. And a lot of companies have also been using them to give gift cards to their employees and customers, etc. So they have that good platform, and they've also been looking outside Iceland and have started collaborating with parties countries such as Canada and Ireland. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. That's an interesting one. And the igloo, that sounds like a cool model. And it would be, I can see how that would be really useful to help people avoid having to, put down collateral or pay 2 months, security deposit or whatever. Interesting concept. So we talked a lot about some of the local players. What about the kind of global players or international companies that have a strong presence in Iceland? For example, here in Hungary, BlackRock and Morgan Stanley and a lot of the big multinational companies have pretty big offices here. And it's something that, we see that they're hiring a lot of the smart people on the market, people who might otherwise be starting companies and founding them. Do you have that same phenomenon happening in Iceland, or how would you comment on the presence of these kind of big conglomerates and how they're interacting in the market?
We don't have that. We don't have that problem of not having enough people to start the companies because they're being overbid by such giants. So maybe it's because Iceland is too small. We're under their radar. Yes, so that's basically it. Iceland is also so they wouldn't come here to get a lot of employees. Salaries are high here, so they're expensive. And the Icelandic market is quite small. The population of Iceland is lower than 400,000 people. So it's a tiny market. It's like one small city in England. And probably, I don't know comparable cities in Hungary.
Well, Budapest, our capital, we have about 2 million people here. So
5 times larger than the entire country of Iceland.
Yeah. So. You mentioned Goldman Sachs, though. Does Goldman have a presence in Iceland, or were they selling to the international? Okay.
Yeah.
How many banks are there in Iceland?
There are 4 main banks, 3 of them sort of incumbent banks. They were raised on the ruins of the banks that fell in 2008. So there's 3, we call them the large banks, but of course they're only large in Iceland. And there's a 4th bank that's smaller that has been very aggressive in fintech. It's called Kvika, and they sort of can't be aggressive because they can innovate a lot, and they are not afraid to really create a splash in the market and try to get the customers from the large banks. There is one neobank called Indo. It's very interesting. So what they're doing, they're sort of just creating all the information systems from scratch, and therefore getting rid of all the problems of the past of the larger banks. And they're sort of an anti-establishment bank as well. Some people have a negative opinion of banks, especially since the banking collapse in 2008. And Indo has been utilizing that, and they've been growing extremely fast. And so, that's the number of banks. I counted 5 there, but we have some small savings banks as well.
Yeah. Wow. But so none of the major international, who are the 3 incumbents? They're not the international banks.
No, these are
everybody's Icelandic. Wow.
Yes,
that's really,
yeah.
That must make for quite a different banking environment.
Yes, very different. Of course, we have our own currency. We have our own regulatory environment. And of course, banking is a lot about trust and this proximity to the bankers. Help create trust, even though there's been distrust recently, like I mentioned. Yeah.
So on the topic of the regulatory environment, that's the next set of questions that I have for you. So how would you, I guess, characterize the regulators? I know you said, it's a small country, your own currency, a few banks, everybody's local. So you must all know each other. But in terms of how open are the regulators to innovation? What's been your relationship with them as part of the cluster?
They're very open to regulation. They have a fintech desk or fintech phone where you can call it anytime if you're thinking about a fintech solution and you want to know if it's regulated or want to book a meeting to see if what kind of license you need, etc. We fundamentally have the same regulatory environment as Europe, being a part of the European Economic Area. And not the European Union, though. And the smallness helps in many ways. It's like you mentioned, everybody knows, not everybody, but they know someone that knows everybody. So you can get in touch with anyone quite quickly, and even if you just call the general line of the central bank, they will give you contact with a relevant person and the ministry, etc. So there are two sides of that. It can make things easier. We have this can-do attitude of solving problems because we've had to for over 1,000 years. We're sort of a people that moved here 1,000 years ago to the edge of the habitable world next to the Arctic, and so it's been tough, and we have had volcanic eruptions and harsh winters, etc. So we have this attitude of just sort of heroically try to solve things, and not always perfectly. We don't wait for a perfect solution because we can't afford to. We just start, which is often the right mindset when you're doing a startup. You shouldn't wait too long. You should get a minimum viable product, etc. But in the regulatory environment, it's that has been helpful in many cases. And so we had the regulator on our side, and we have the government on our side. But the flip side of this is that sometimes we have too few people to get large projects done within the government. When you have, say, a ministry of business or trade in another country, you might have 20 lawyers working on a certain regulation, while in Iceland you would only have one, and he would bear all the responsibility for everything. And so some things take a little longer here. But it seems that it's not a 20-to-1 disadvantage. For example, in this case, it seems like perhaps people have a tendency to hire too many people for certain jobs. So people have to become very efficient here because there's few of us. So there are pros and cons working with a regulator here.
Yeah. That's incredible, though. You basically have a hotline that anybody can call and get right through and just have their question answered. That's pretty incredible. Yes. In terms of waiting for an official response, I mean, does that count? That's, if they say, okay, what license do we need? Or do you have some sort of a sandbox? I mean, I know that was something that the Hungarian regulators started, I think, pretty early. They were one of the first ones to come out with the regulatory sandbox. You had something like this, I guess, in Iceland as well.
We don't have a formal regulatory sandbox, and they've sort of had the problem with how to implement it because it's hard to. What are you going to give certain companies exemptions from the law? So that's pretty hard. So they just rather try to work well with the companies that apply for licenses and guide them well. Usually the central bank, which is also the financial supervisory authority, is quite quick. Other authorities in Iceland can be quite bad because you have to know, for example, from the tax authorities, will a certain product be taxed in a certain way? And the tax authorities are much worse. They don't want to tell you beforehand whether you're going to be taxed. They want you to try it out, and then they will come after you. So they're not that.
And then that can come and kill the business model.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. You need clear answers on things like this before going ahead. So that's a problem sometimes. But in certain cases, it's not a problem. There's no tax question involved. And so in those cases, we are in a very good position.
And what kinds of things do you regulate at the national level, or what has been regulated and what's maybe still unregulated? I'm thinking about things like cryptocurrency, the sharing economy, crowdfunding. I know those were all different regulation cycles that had to happen here in Hungary, and we still haven't solved all of those. But maybe you mentioned some of these fintechs that are working in some of these areas, but yeah, what can you say about those?
In some cases, you need the regulation. For example, in crypto, you need clarity on taxation. And we have now, it seems, clarity on that just based on judgments by the courts. And so that took some time to find out. Regarding other things like the sharing economy, crowdfunding, etc., the general rule is that what is not explicitly forbidden is allowed, and therefore there's just freedom in that, and you can do things. But we do know that there is an intent to regulate things like crowdfunding later on, but it's not regulated at this time.
Interesting.
Yes, and
Go
so
ahead.
there's I would like to mention in relation to this that Iceland could be interesting for certain parties to try something out in a very small market, to collaborate with Icelanders to start something and then be able to roll it out internationally. Maybe you have the same situation in Hungary. You have the local market first, and then you can roll something out internationally. But in some cases, Iceland might be an interesting choice for some of your members.
Yeah, that's something I also wanted to ask about, just maybe kind of the local population, because I think in Hungary, more and more people are speaking English. I don't know how people speak English in Iceland, if it would be easy to come in, or would have to localize everything. But there's kind of a divide in terms of digitalization. I think obviously the younger generation and coming up is increasingly digital, but there is a pretty stable older population that will never really be a digital group, and trying to coming up with solutions that can solve some of those. That group also has its own particular problems, but maybe what can you say? I'm assuming Iceland has a quite digital savvy population.
Yes,
and
very, yeah.
Okay, so people are open to using these kind of things. Is
Absolutely.
Cash still very prevalently used, or is everybody paying by card now? Or I don't know. Yeah, maybe you can
Very
kind of
little
comment on.
cash. It's very little now. It's getting less and less. And Icelanders have been very early adopters of most technologies. And Iceland fluency in English is quite common. So we've had, like many other countries, we've had all the entertainment from America and England for many decades, and during the Second World War, we had both the British Army and the American Army stationed here. So that's so everybody has had some contact with English, and if you meet a senior citizen, you would expect that person to speak English.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's Any other sort of customer habits? Any sort of quirks about being Icelandic? I mean, that was interesting what you shared about the cultural background. Just being on this island for 1,000 years at the edge of civilization, you have to survive. I can imagine that makes for actually quite a great background for entrepreneurship. I mean, it's sort of the same thing. There's a lot of unknowns. You have to just go for it and try to figure it out, and keep moving forward somehow. So that's really interesting.
Especially in fintech, because we had this big banking system. We have many people that have some sort of knowledge in finance and fintech. And so we have this large pool of people that can start fintech companies relative to other countries. We have more fintechs per capita than probably any country. And so there's this there are all these people that have been working in banks, especially, partly before the banking crisis. So Icelandic banks had been buying banks and securities companies all around the world, and they've become huge. And so we have all these people that have experience from that, even though that didn't go well. And so that does help. And in general, in innovation, people that have more experience are more likely to succeed. And especially in this area, because there are so many nuances in the markets where experience helps. So we think that, yes, we think that we are very well situated for all sorts of innovation, and we think it's going to continue.
Yeah, that's also really interesting. Just because of the nature of banking in Iceland, because you have your own currency and it's so small, yet there are so many people with a strong background because you've been playing on an international level, even from your country. And so that gives you this kind of experience and ability to compete on a global level. So I think it's really cool. It wasn't a coincidence that we wanted to talk to Iceland for our first global ecosystem tour stop. Great. Okay, I have a couple other questions, and I see one or two is popping in here. So in terms of just other ecosystems, I mean, I feel like there are some similarities, even maybe thinking about Singapore, also a very small country, but with a global presence and influence. How would you compare Iceland, or where else have you had experience personally, and how would you compare, I guess, your home ecosystem with some of the others around the world?
I don't have experience from around the world, but I have experience from Europe and North America, and I would think that the culture is most similar in the Nordics, and then perhaps in North America and Canada. We can see that the culture in Canada is quite close to the Nordics, and actually a lot of Nordic people emigrated to Canada. So there are actual Nordic roots in Canada. A lot of the people from the north of Europe went to the north of North America. And so there's that. And I think the Nordic countries are quite similar in some way. There's something about them. They're all quite small, even though Iceland is the smallest. It's tiny. And so similar dynamics seem to be at work there. There's a lot of innovation there. Although, the number of fintechs per capita is the highest in Iceland. But obviously these are larger markets, so the fintechs have, in general, been larger in those countries.
Yeah, I think being from a small country, I mean, we think of Hungary also as rather small, though I know we're much bigger. There is this kind of
What's the population of Hungary?
About 10 million. Yeah. So, but it's just big enough that you can create sort of a decent lifestyle business if you just focus on Hungary. But if you want to take on investment or grow at all, you need to think about bigger than just the local story pretty much from day one. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse, I guess. We have companies that can maybe survive for a little while just looking at the local market. But I think in Iceland, you have to think, okay, how can we grow?
Yes, exactly.
And so you have to, if you want to survive.
Yeah.
Sorry?
They're born global. They have
born
to think
global
from day one.
Yeah. And do a lot of companies go through investment rounds, or is there a lot of capital available for fintechs in Iceland, or are they mostly bootstrapped and then raised from international investors once they reach a certain level of traction? Or maybe you could comment on that piece as well.
There is some capital. There are private investors that invest in those companies in the earliest rounds, like seed rounds, and then we have the most notable VC funds. There's 4 of them. It's not a large number, but each of them might have something like $30 to $60 million in at any given time. So yes, and they of course, these funds are generalist funds, but they do invest in fintech, and they've been very helpful for the growth of the companies.
Has there been any government investment as well into fintechs or matching funds or things like that?
Not matching funds. There is one government VC fund, which I didn't mention, that comes in earlier and with lower amounts. So they have done that, but there's also this program where you apply for grants, and then you write these long applications and you send it to the government, and they approve some of them and not others. And as you can see, it's an imperfect process. I would rather have matching funds, because let the people with skin in the game decide which projects to go forward with, and then match those funds. So there's a certain loss that takes place when you have this these government funds that just issue grants to some and not others. So there has been that, but there's no specific fund for fintech in that. They just apply like any other innovative company.
Would you say, though, overall that there's a healthy early stage amount of capital for companies for fintechs in Iceland, and you don't feel like it's possible for them to grow?
I'd like it to be a little more, but yes. Yeah.
Well, maybe some of the founders of some of these companies that you mentioned will start reinvesting into the ecosystem, and you can build up the kind of an angel community. That's what we're trying to do here as well, create this kind of flywheel effect, because that's really how an ecosystem can grow.
Yeah, it does take a while, but fintech has been better off than many other startup sectors, because private investors like to invest in something that they know, and not many people have gotten rich in Iceland from startups, but a lot of people have gotten rich from finance. And so these people in finance, since fintech is essentially just the future of finance, they've been showing interest in that. So we're in a much better position than many other startups.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have 2 more questions for you, and then I'll open it up for the audience. So if anybody's here and they have a question for Gunnlaugur or about Iceland, go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll get to it in a moment. I wanted to ask a bit about open banking as a topic. So you mentioned that you're under the same kind of regulatory environment as, not the European Union, but the European Monetary Zone. And so I guess PSD2 was also a regulation that you had to comply with.
Yes.
How has that been going, I guess, broadly? I mean, do you feel like, because I guess from my perspective, I won't speak for all of us, but I was really excited about this, 5 years ago when this was, and I think we in the bank that, where Zoltan works and where I was working previously, we were really trying to come out and be forward looking and, take advantage of this big wave. And it feels like it's been slower to really pick up, I guess, than maybe we were anticipating at the time. There are some open banking use cases that are interesting, but I would say it's so hard for a fintech to get the third-party license to actually be able to capitalize on this. I mean, I'm not sure the total number now in Hungary, but it was like 8 to 10, I think, the last time that I looked at this. How would you say this is going in Iceland? Are there a lot of companies that have a TPP license, or maybe what's your view there?
It's very slow, and it's the same experience. It's much slower than people anticipated. I started to expect that when I was in a long, soul-crushing meeting about the PSD2 requirements, with all those different definitions and terms and complications about it. And I sort of started to believe that blockchain would reach the same goals in a much more efficient way, being a largely unregulated field. blockchain is essentially just much more open banking. And so I think there's going to be a future in that, given that people embrace it. On the basis of PSD2, there have been something like 2 or 3 companies that have been at least interested in licenses. I don't know if they already have them, but there are hurdles. For example, you could imagine before that you could pay with an independent app using your account at any bank. And that is that's not a very smooth process, because you have to log into the bank every single time. It can never compete with Apple Pay that just looks at your face and you can pay instantly. So what we need to do is make it possible to authenticate people with the same way, in the same manner, so that you can look at the face and use that software in the phone, the same way as Apple Pay does it, if it's going to compete with that. So yeah, there's that hurdle, and there are more hurdles. But I think that maybe some things will build over time. This is, of course, innovation. People are just fumbling around in the dark, trying to find something that's interesting, and maybe one of those things will start growing and then grow very fast once it's found. So yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm I guess relieved, or I don't know. At least we can commiserate. I think soul crushing is the right word.
Yes.
About some of this. Okay, I just wanted to ask quickly about Speakness, your other project, briefly, and then we can go to our Q&A from the audience.
Yeah. You want me to tell you about it?
Yes. Yeah, what do you do there? Yeah.
It's not a fintech, so it's unrelated. Okay. And but I'm one of the founders of a company that's trying to create a better environment for internet discussions. We think that internet discussions have created a very bad situation in the world. We think there's a lot of propaganda. We think there's a lot of dishonesty. We think that good people avoid internet discussions because a lot of people that have these bad traits of, psychological traits of abusive people have been overrepresented online, shall we say. And so we have this solution, and it is at its core a commenting system for media. So if there are any media in Hungary that want to get in touch, be my guest. So it's a commenting system where we crowdsource the opinion of the readers about which comments are civil enough to be visible. And then, of course, the media itself decides on what's visible and what is not. And then there's people also vote in what are useful comments. That is what is constructive for the conversation. And then people vote on what they agree with, which is a different thing. So you can think something is useful for the discussion, even if you disagree with it. So we're trying to get people to talk to each other instead of not listening and just shouting at each other or talking at each other. Yes. And then out of the media, we create this sort of decentralized network where all the media control and moderate their areas, but with the help of these crowdsourced votes. And it's very inexpensive for the media compared with moderating this by using employees, because a usual media organization that has a comment section has to have a few employees just monitoring the comment section. So it saves money. It also creates more engagement because of interesting things that come out of it, because there's information on what the best news is today, where's the best journalism, what are the most popular comments, where's the most controversy, etc. And then we're going to build a platform around that, speakness.com, where people can control their media consumption, their news consumption. And yeah.
Great. Well, definitely a very interesting project, much needed in the world. So I wish you luck with that one, especially in the US. So moving to some of our questions from the audience now. First question here, what emerging technologies, aside from blockchain, are gaining traction in Icelandic fintech?
I would mention, well, the Icelandic companies, because even though we have many fintech companies per capita, we don't have as many as other countries because the country is tiny. So it's so we don't have many examples of individual technologies. We have perhaps one technology in this sector, one company in this sector, one in another, etc. But one notable thing is artificial intelligence, of course, as there is in all the world probably right now. So yes, I would mention that.
Okay. Yeah, that would be the one I would have suggested. I feel like to me, it feels like the hype for AI, especially generative AI, is the same as it was for blockchain like 3 or 4 years ago. I feel like now blockchain, nobody's, but it's AI.
Yeah. But still, I believe that the future is, there's a great future in blockchain. It just takes a while. There's internationally, a lot of projects going on that are developing blockchain. And I think it's going to explode when you get this connection between the old world, the old banking world, and the real world, and this blockchain world. The blockchain world has just revolved about itself so much, these crypto coins and business with that. But when this connection comes with the real world, I think it's going to explode.
Yes, absolutely. I think I've seen so many companies that are in the beginning that were blockchain just for blockchain's sake, but there wasn't really a utility or anything that was, that you could grasp. But I think, agree, the technology has a lot of promise, and we just have to see it paired with the right use cases. Okay, the next question here. Are there collaborations between Icelandic fintech firms and traditional banks?
Yes. One I would like to mention is this rent guarantee platform that I mentioned. They're selling guarantees from an Icelandic bank, so they do not provide the guarantee themselves. That's sort of the most notable collaboration. There's one fintech company I didn't mention. It's called Meniga. What they do is they help people get an overview of their personal finances. And they're working around the globe now, but they started working exclusively with Icelandic banks. So it's a sort of a white label solution, or at least a plug-in solution that banks use. So there's that. And of course, there are many collaborations with the companies that provide services regarding the core systems of the banks, like loan systems, and regarding authentication, digital signatures, and contracts, things like that.
Interesting. And kind of maybe related or a tangent from that question, how can local banks make partnerships with fintech companies? Can they be the first clients of the fintechs in Iceland, or is it more common to step out into the global market at the very beginning? I think we've touched on this a little bit in the discussion, but it sounds like it's gone both ways. So, they can either start with a local Icelandic bank as a client or start selling globally at the same time. I guess maybe a variant of that, my question would also be, do Icelandic banks work with fintechs from outside of Iceland too? Or you see that being, or is it more of an emphasis on the local fintechs because of the things that we talked about, the nature of the currency, the population, everybody is there?
They do work with foreign companies that have been enabling for their own services, like Enfuse, for example. I think they're from Finland. So I think they help the banks issue cards, and they also help fintechs issue cards. And so they've been working with a few Icelandic companies, including at least one bank. So there are examples of that. In general, because we've been helping people approach Icelandic banks, if there's a very clear, and of course many of the systems that the Icelandic banks use are foreign systems, like the deposit and payment system in the country is called Sopra. I think that's where is that from Belgium or something? I'm not sure. So there are such examples. They do that, but they're not front runners in that. They would be rather likely to be front runners with Icelandic companies. And it's harder to approach them across the ocean. We've helped some international companies approach the Icelandic banks. And what you have, I'm not sure that they are at a disadvantage. I just think that in order to get a deal with an Icelandic banks, you have to sort of be here and be willing to take meeting after meeting, etc. in order to get it done. It's very hard to do it by flying back and forth all the time. So yes, I think they're open to it, but you sort of have to establish a presence here just to increase the likelihood of it.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think it's the same with the banks anywhere. It's a long sales cycle, so you have to be determined and nearby. Okay. The next question, can you highlight any unique niche markets or demographics that Icelandic fintech companies are targeting with specialized services? You talked about the rental guarantee, that Igloo, and then yeah, I think you mentioned a couple, but is there anything else that comes to mind here?
There's one. I don't know if it answers the question, but there's one fintech. Actually, two of them working together. They're issuing carbon certificates on blockchains. So, because if you're buying carbon certificates to offset something, if you're a company buying a carbon certificate to say that something is carbon neutral, you have to be able to prove that, and you have to be able to burn the carbon credit, so to speak, or in a provable way, or the certificate. So because you're not supposed to use it again and again. You're only supposed to use it once against some emissions that you may create. So there's that. They're doing it on blockchains, and blockchains are very good for that because they're so transparent. Everybody can see, okay, this company had those credits, they used them this year, it's done, and they have to do it again then if they're gonna, they have to prove it again if they're gonna do it next year, for example. So yeah, that's one example.
That's a good one. Another great example of how Iceland and the Nordics can actually create a sustainable business around these kind of topics, because I'm a little bit more pessimistic on some of that.
Yeah.
Great. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. We have just two last questions, and I think they're great ones. So we'll answer these, and then we can wrap up. But one question, somebody wanted to know, what fintech solutions do you use in your everyday life?
That's a good question. I essentially just use my internet bank. I'd like to have some more solutions. I get a lot of ideas, and I share them with entrepreneurs, and I encourage them to start companies about them. But essentially, I've just been using the internet bank of my personal bank.
And it's not the neobank? You're using one of the incumbents?
No, I do have the neobank app. But I do see, when I look at my phone now, I can see there's one insurance company in the country that was very early at just using an app for claims. So you have something that's broken, and you just take a picture of it and you send it in there, and they automatically approve or don't approve your claim, and they get a lot done that way. A large proportion of all claims, they get done that way. So that's one I use, at least.
Hopefully you don't have to use it too much.
Oh, no, not too much. Yeah.
It's I guess Revolut is not in Iceland.
Revolut is formally in Iceland. Of course, they don't have a lot of presence, but I do have Revolut. I do have some crypto on my Revolut wallet, but I haven't been using it a lot, the app.
And then last question, which is the one that I would have ended on anyway. Nordic companies are very good at marketing, it sounds like. If a Hungarian fintech decides to enter the Icelandic market, what advice do you have?
Yes, I would advise you to work with some local people, at least one person that has knowledge of the market and how to roll things out here, has connections with everybody just to get attention. It's easy here to get in the media, get on radio stations, get an interview, or get in newspapers, etc. So I would recommend that. We had, do you know the delivery service Wolt, W-O-L-T?
Yes, they're here too. Yeah, they're very big here.
They were just launching. They have an office here with us, and they came here and they just launched here, and they've been very well received. So
I think that's the other thing. Become a member of the Fintech Cluster.
Yes, of course, become a member. Yes.
Great.
And we can help you out, of course, if you. We could be your first point of contact in getting to know all the right people regarding marketing, but also regarding regulation and contacting anyone that you need to work with, or be it a fintech or a bank or anyone.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gunnlaugur. This was super interesting. You've definitely piqued my interest, and I would love to come to Reykjavik and visit you guys and get to know the ecosystem even more in person. So thank you. This was incredible. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar coming up. And Gunnlaugur, if you ever find yourself in Budapest, we'd be happy to host you and take you around and show you our ecosystem as well. So thank you so much for your time. Take care. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.